Hi, this is Dan, and welcome to today's Industry Quick Takes. We're going to be talking about the kerfluffle that is surrounding the cancellation of Batgirl. It is indeed very shocking to see so many of the industry press get things so, and I can only put this mildly, deliberately incorrect. First of all, there's a very good reason why Zaslav has canceled this movie. It was a $90 million investment that had clearly gone wrong. Discovery took over Warner Brothers because Warner Brothers had, quite frankly, been absolutely screwing up to the degree that AT&T was willing to take a $45 billion loss in order to get that company off of its books. This is not because Warner Brothers had been doing such an exemplary job over the years. In fact, when AT&T bought it, they had been in a very, very brief renaissance period where you had Game of Thrones and Joker and a whole host of other movies performing really well. But in a short while after that, they had gone on a ridiculous spree of making bad content. You saw the last season of Game of Thrones tank the franchise. Now, maybe they can redeem it. After all, look at how Sony was able to redeem their Ghostbusters franchise. So there is a possibility that they're able to make up for the bad last season of that. But remember that Batgirl was started under the previous regime. And since that time, there has been a reckoning in the streaming world. There has been a reckoning in the Chinese market. Both of these two things have made it so that the kind of profligacy that had been enjoyed by the entertainment industry for well over a decade was rapidly coming to an end. And we see that reflected in the stock valuations of many of the companies. It is for this reason that someone like Zaslav needed to get control of the way the movies are made, the way their intellectual properties are handled. We cannot risk losing another round of highly valuable IPs to insanely inappropriate film adaptations. I'm not going to get into the content of this too much other than to say that clearly where the $90 million was spent was considered to be something that was not fixable. Having worked in market research, I understand very clearly that there are times when a movie can have some things wrong with it, that you can go in there, do a little bit of judicious reshooting, trimming, and you end up with something that is more than fine. There are other times when there are very, very deeply rooted problems with the picture that cannot be fixed by just a few reshoots. Take a look at what happened with Solo. When you made Solo and you had the fatal mistake of miscasting it and having perhaps the wrong creatives doing the adaptation, that mistake was not improved by spending another $150 million by bringing in Ron Howard, rejiggering the entire tone of the movie and ending up with something that didn't perform any better than if they had just finished posting it and throwing it out there. But that was from a different era when the stakes weren't as high as they are now, when it looked like there was still going to be incredible revenues coming in from the growth of streaming. And plus, at that point, we hadn't gone through the pandemic. So Disney was not hobbled by the financial disaster that happened during that era when they weren't getting the $30 million a day in revenues from their parks. Fortunately for Disney, that has been somewhat reversed. And fortunately also for their creative side, you have Bob Chapek in there, who is trying to gain control over certain aspects of the company that are not acting in the best financial interests. And as a corporation, no company can afford to look like it's squandering shareholder potential profit by mismanagement. It might look like spending $90 million and then just canceling and taking a tax reduction is an extreme measure. But let's look at it another way. There are a number of things at stake here that make that decision actually wise. The number one reason, and ironically, I don't think many people look at it this way, it's because of Leslie Grace and Adil El Arbi and Bilali Fala. I'm sorry if I mispronounced their names, but the three of them are in extreme critical danger in their careers if this movie went forward with its release and it bombed. For the two directors, this is coming on the heels of them doing a very audience-pleasing, but nonetheless not very well viewed version of Ms. Marvel. And despite the good critical response, the lack of audience buy-in makes this movie one that people are going to look at to see if their careers are indeed fire in a bottle or something that could be disastrous for them long term. So by suppressing this, by them being as gracious as they were in the press, they will get another try at bat. And that could be something that will improve their chances of having a long-term career. As for Leslie Grace, this was a shining moment for her to be a star. But what if it blows up? What if it's not any good? Then all of a sudden, her career is over. We don't want that. And Warner Brothers, having experienced what happened with Batwoman and all of the chaos that surrounded that, was very wise to say, we don't want to burn down not only an IP, but also two very strong directors and a potential star. So this was actually a wise decision. And I know people are going to say, oh, it's racist, it's sexist, and Zaslav doesn't know what he's doing. I'm going to say, think twice before you say something like that, because if this movie had spent, let's say, another $50 million doing reshoots to address some of the problems that had been already mentioned from this test screening, which, by the way, and Hollywood Reporter in particular knows better than to say what they said. To say, well, horror movies sometimes test badly and they do fine, or it tested badly and it did fine, and it was unfair to judge this based on the test when all of the special effects aren't done. But that is the point. Let's get real. With horror movies, very seldom do they test well with the general public. And for a horror movie, testing well has absolutely nothing to do with its eventual box office result. On the other hand, something that is dramatic, something that could be star-making, can indeed be problematic. Look at what's happened with Margot Robbie's career since the last Birds of Prey. Now, here, I know it might seem unfair, but the most recent Birds of Prey did her severe collateral damage. Okay, yeah, maybe she'll take over Pirates of the Caribbean, which I think is an insane idea as well. But the amount of momentum that she had coming off of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was something that indicated that she could be our next big star. The press that surrounded some of her statements with Birds of Prey, particularly the ones where she was trying to explain why she didn't want to go down the glamour pathway, I thought was kind of premature in her career. She's not Elizabeth Taylor agreeing to do Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She was still in that ingenue phase where, let's face it, a lot of her star power was based on her looks. If people don't like that, too bad. That is a box office reality. And so by her doing that, and then the movie coming out badly, her career has a little bit of a challenge. And I'm going to hope that she gets past it, because I do think that she's a very strong personality, and one misstep film should not take her out. But also, that was still under a previous regime at Warner Brothers, which wasn't, let's be fair, they weren't really looking out to protect their stars. They were looking to protect their correct seat at the polo lounge. They weren't. They were playing a different game. They were playing a game that the studios go through whenever the industry is in a huge upswing, when a new technology comes about, and all of a sudden there's this feeling that there doesn't have to be fiscal responsibility because there's a new way of laying off IP that doesn't perform the way it was supposed to. And the promise of streaming was so enticing. The promise of China and an audience that equaled the entire North American continent and most of Western Europe in just its middle class was something that was tantalizing. And it was also mistaken. And that reality now is being factored in to all of the studio's decision making. And so canceling this project, not having, instead of, let's say, $90 million at play, let's say you have $140 million at play because you've reshot so much. Let's say that you have to do additional damage control and publicity. So that means your marketing budget is probably going to end up being north of $100 million as well. So now you have a need for that movie to perform better than something that can be just an HBO Max original. It has to be something that goes beyond that and sparks further IP. Preferably in a theatrical release where it would more than make its initial cost back in film rentals. And here's the important part. Once you have 140 million going out there in order to make your base investment back, because that's really the number we're looking to do with the theatrical window. If you need to make that amount of money back in this in this theatrical release, that means it's going to have to do north of $500 million. When we have a movie that is underperforming in this way, and we're going to assume that again, it's not just the totals of people saying whether they would rate it excellent or definitely recommend it. You also have to look at how the lead performer scores against the supports. And I'm going to bet with the support that includes Michael Keaton and Brandon Fraser that Leslie Grace was at a distinct disadvantage. And that could be really a problem. And that's a fundamental problem that's very difficult to address through just cutting or minor reshoots. So I do think that Warner Brothers, based on the fact that this was never going to make 500 million, and if it indeed did not play well with its audiences, you now have a risk of having burned down the Batgirl potential franchise for the future. Better to start from scratch. Better to perhaps build Leslie Grace's career in a different way. Better still to take Arby and Fala's extreme talent and ability to connect with their content and put it in a more humanist environment, because that is what made Ms. Marvel so special. And unfortunately, I think Ms. Marvel happened to hit at a moment when there's just the beginnings of a little bit of fatigue over perhaps running the sprockets off of too many new shows coming on top of each other, to where the level of excitement isn't what it should be. Anyway, my hope is that this ends up being indeed the correct assessment. I believe that for everyone's career, this was the correct decision, and definitely financially. Remember, going back to Solo, which was again a different period and one that was more lucrative right now because you still had a little bit of a stronger theatrical with everybody not even thinking about going to a theater. you have a little bit more of a discerning audience. So with that caveat, Solo's entire box office receipt did not make up for the cost of just the reshoots. That's something to consider strongly. Zaslav's job is to cut the hemorrhaging and the losses. And that's the bottom line. Swanee.